Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I am very happy to have you with us as well as my guest. And his name is Dr. Stuart, Brad Stuart, beg your pardon, Dr. Stuart to you. Dr. Brad Stuart is joining us to talk once again. He's a returning guest to talk about facing death, spirituality, science, and the surrender at the end of life. And Doctor, I thank you so much for joining us again here on the program. This is really a pleasure. I use this phrase all the time. I may want to come up with something else. It may not sound quite right, but this subject is near and dear to my heart because I have been curious about it for so long. Thanks for being here.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's really a pleasure.
I'm just curious. Have you ever had what some people say a near-death experience of that kind?
No, I have not. Well, it's near-death experiences are interesting, as I say, in the book. I've been through surgery, a number of serious surgeries. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I don't recall a near-death experience, but that doesn't mean that I didn't have one. It's the thing about those experiences is they tend to happen when your brain is a little short on oxygen. And when the oxygen comes back, it can wipe out your short-term memory. So we're already getting a lot of reports, a lot more than we used to, of near-death experiences. And I think that's because resuscitation science and critical care have gotten so good at pulling people back. But, not everyone remembers because when you come back, your brain may not retain what you saw. So I'm guessing a lot more people have these experiences than are reporting them.
Mm. And on that on that subject, as far as the medical field, in terms of this resuscitation, do you think the medical community has a problem with saying when, or shall we say, crying uncle? And it's like, because there are times when I think you should have let him or her go. It was their time. It's almost as if, the phrase, you're playing God. What do you think?
That's a great question. And, I wrestled with that. I spent a lot of time working in the ICU back when I was in real active practice, 24/7 on call for 10 years. I often ask myself that same question. And the answer to me was yes, we stand in the way of what's natural. I think a lot of it depends on what people want. We live in a country where you get to decide what you would like. for your care. And if you're alert enough and with it, and you can say, I want everything, well, you're pretty obligated to follow that if that's what the patient says. What bothers me is I can't tell you how many older patients, I mean elderly, who've lived a good life. They have chronic illness. They're very weak. They're often in pain. They're not getting a lot out of life anymore, and they don't necessarily want to go on. But we physicians, don't ask. We just bring them back and bring them back, and many times families will insist on us doing that, where I would always sit down with my patients one on one and ask them what they wanted without the family in the room, and then bring the family back in and report back on what they said. In fact,
Mm.
I have a chapter in my book that describes one of those stories. It's so interesting to talk to people about what they want instead of inflicting on them something that other people want for them. And I think that's where we can go wrong.
DNRs are becoming more popular, if I've got the acronym correct. Do not resuscitate. um, my father was the latest to pass on a year and a half ago. I can't believe it's come March, it'll be 2 years. And it's just been interesting to think about what he was experiencing following his departure from the body, if he was experiencing anything at all. Now, just as a preface for you, my philosophical leanings are that it doesn't make sense to me intellectually, bear in mind intellectually, that after this life and that the body discontinues its functionality, that it's lights out. Now, if that is the case, I'm never going to know it anyway, so it doesn't matter from that standpoint. But with everything that we go through, all of the questioning and the experiences that we have, and the people that we are associated with, the places we go, and the list goes on, that's it. That's all there is. If to quote the line from a song, is that all there is? No, it can't be. So from just a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense that that's it. But I know that a lot of people believe that. I also know there are a lot of people who are afraid because of that possibility that that's all there is, as well as others who have the beliefs that on the other side, it's not going to be so great. Some with, they say that there's judgment, and then there's hell, and then there's purgatory, and all of these different possibilities. From what you have been able to ascertain, are any of these real possibilities, or is that an area that you don't get into?
No, I get totally into it. I think that's what's really important to talk about. You're bringing up the topic that is the most difficult, especially for most doctors who were very scientific. It's very difficult to talk about. And I have to admit to you, Richard, that when I was in practice, it wasn't until I got into end of life care and did hospice for many years and spent time with people as they got to the end of life in the hospital and then often in their homes in home hospice that I started to really think that I was wrong back in the day when I thought, with my medical training, in hand, I thought that when your body ended, that was it. And then in the hospital, I would watch as people died, and everybody else would leave the room and I would stay just because there was something that made me curious about the feeling in the room and what that person was like just as they died. I go into great depth about that in my book because I think from what I've learned from that, and now, this is the biggest irony, Richard, that science is convinced that our brain creates consciousness and that when the body stops, we stop existing. That's science's, that's bedrock assumptions to science. What's really ironic is now that we have good resuscitation practice and resuscitation science and critical care, we're getting stories from people who are brought back after their heart stops, and they all basically tell the same story. And I consider that data. I don't just think it's stories out of woo-woo land. Honestly, it's survey research data. If you know research, we talk to people all the time and get their stories, what they think, what they feel, what they experience, because there's no way to measure that other than talking to people. What people are telling us is that the people who recall what it was like when they passed over and then were brought back. uh, they all say basically the same thing. Very, very few. There are a few stories about purgatory or hell, but those seem to be the people who really have trouble letting go.
Hmm.
That's why I put the word surrender in the title. It's critical. The letting go part of dying is really important, and that's what we help people with in hospice to be able to let go. But what people are telling us is that your awareness does not end when you die. And it once people are on the other side and look back at their body, whether they're hovering above it in the operating room or however they're seeing it, they understand immediately, although it's confusing at first, that they are not the same as their body. They still exist, even though their body is cold and dead.
Hmm.
I think I try to, in the book, really go into some depth on what that's about and why it's important. Again, that's funny, but I used to think that a lot of this stuff was just airy-fairy, woo-woo Hollywood, malarkey. And yet I think science is showing us that we do not stop existing when our body dies. And in fact, we're only here in this body for a short time, if what people say is true.
Yeah.
We have been back and forth in and out of different bodies at different times. And I don't want to get into reincarnation. I want to stay with
Sure.
what happens as we let go and die.
Hmm.
And what I think is the good news is I don't think we have to be as afraid as we often are. People have worked with are universally happened to me when I was diagnosed with cancer. It's you are horror struck. I was by the prospect of having to leave, and it's still is a terrifying thing, even to me, despite all my experience. You can't help being afraid and having trouble letting go. That's just part of being in a body. But once you're able to let go and get over that hump, my experience with many, many people is that the end of life is not horrifying at all.
Hmm.
If it's handled well with the right support, people do extremely well, and many of them and their families who their surviving loved ones will say that was one of the most amazing, meaningful times we ever had together before that person died. What happens after?
Wow.
We can't know that, but I'm here to tell you that the data, and I think it's scientific data, is compelling and really increasing in volume that death is not really the end of who we actually are.
A couple things. Number one, it was shared with me about my father's final hours by my mother and sisters who were there and other members of the family. I was not able to get there, but I was able to talk to him the night before he passed, and that was a beautiful thing. My wife and I both got to not just talk to him, but see him. I'm so thankful for technology today. But what they did was they placed chairs around his bed in my parents' home, and they, as my mother phrased it, they sang my father into heaven. They sang all kinds of different songs. I've never gotten a list. I would love to get that list, but I never got a list. I'd love to find out exactly what songs. And I'm sure they were probably songs that we sang when we went on vacations across the state of Arizona into California and different places. Maybe church songs, and maybe songs that my mother and my father they listened to on the radio as they were growing up and so forth back in the 50s and 60s and on and on and on. And I thought, wow, would that not be a great experience to know that, hey, it's okay, I can go anytime. And wow, listen to them sing. How cool is that? I get that kind of a send off. Um, it's a beautiful thing. And again, not to get into reincarnation, but there is this science called LBL, or Life Between Lives, that Dr. Newton has written about in many books, case studies, where he would take people into under hypnosis back to their last lifetime and then to their death, and then what happens between that life and this life. I have actually experienced that, and it was so fascinating that there have been times like, not that this life is that bad, but it's like I'd love to go back to that. That was very cool. That lifetime that I was in before this one, because I'm living at one level, I am actually living the same lifestyle or similar lifestyle that I was as a farmer on the prairie, back wherever that was. And I live here in Santa Barbara, up on the mountain above Santa Barbara, in a very rural area with about 9 acres that, we occupy about an acre and a half. And I chop firewood and we have chickens and so on and so forth. So it's really kind of cool to have that. I want to ask you from the scientific standpoint, and this is to me extremely important, because unless we understand when the physical life ends, and recognizing and agreeing with you that this is just a short, I say we're here for less than a puff of smoke in time, but we need to understand when life in the physical body ends in order to truly know when life begins. And that's a real controversial subject. But it also goes to another area too. There are two passages in the New Testament that are almost paradoxical or contradictory. One says it is appointed to man once to die, and then the judgment. And then there's the section that speaks of the death and then the raising from the dead Lazarus. And I'm constantly asking the question, well, wait a minute. It's appointed to every man once to die and then the judgment. Is Lazarus the exception to the rule, or was he not dead? And and to me, that defining that moment, that instant, seems to be, well, at least to me, it's important. You have anything to add to that, or respond in that regard to when are we technically and completely dead?
Well, I am no biblical scholar. I've read certain parts of the New Testament several times just because I wanted to see what Jesus actually said. Um, I wasn't my father wouldn't allow us to go to church as kids. I had no religion. Any spirituality I got was really after I got into medicine and started to realize what a miracle our lives are, and what miracles there may be even after our life ends. But as far as, say, take Lazarus, the people, there are so many experts, and like you say, it's that there's contradictory material in the Bible and contradictory opinions. And Lazarus, if you want to regard it as literal, I think it's possible that Lazarus wasn't technically dead, uh, and when Jesus revived him, or he may have been technically dead, and Jesus was able to bring him back to life again. We do it all the time in the ICU. So,
Hmm.
that's technically very possible. The other possibility that other people talk about is Jesus did a whole lot of bringing people's minds back from the death that we call being alive. I
Hmm.
think what Jesus was really about was waking people up. And going back to near-death experiences, what's so striking about what people talk, plain old people from all walks of life who have these experiences, some of them are total atheists before they die and come back. Some of them are very religious. Some of them are scientists who were complete skeptics and they came back with a very different mindset. They tell a story that's very similar to the wake up stories that I think Jesus was talking about and actually doing for people, as it's told in the Bible. He was waking people up. And if you look at the stories that people tell when they come back, I tell a story in my book of a woman who had been a friend of mine for quite a while. I knew her for years. She got cancer. She had treatment that was very intensive. She had to go away from home to a university hospital, and the chemo was so intense that she had a seizure and fell on the floor, hit her head, and hurt herself. And but when she woke up, she said, I am not in the same place that I was before I had that seizure. She was in a different place and she was able to be aware and remember it and
Mm.
talk from there. And I tell in great detail all the questions that I asked her. I went to see her a couple of times. She was bedridden from cancer in in the spine of her neck. She was basically paralyzed, couldn't get out of bed, and yet she was happy. She was ecstatic. She was ready to go. And she had teenage daughters. She was really able to let go. Why? Because she had gone to she called it the knowledge place. She
Mm.
said, "We're like ants. We're like ants in regular life. And in the knowledge place, you can look down and see what our, anthill life that we think is normal was always like. It's actually the viewpoint from the knowledge place, which is the very same place people talk about when they come back from being dead and what they see on the other side. It's the very same story. They get incredible knowledge that they'd never had before. Their mind is totally expanded because it's no longer inside their brain. It's
Mm.
free to be what it actually is.
Mm.
And in the Bible, I think the stories of Jesus's miracles, many of them, you could easily interpret that as he was able to wake people up. I don't know for what reason, what power or skill that he had. He was able to live in that knowledge place. Many, many very wise people have, through history, been able to do that and help people awaken to what really is our natural state, that after we die, everybody probably gets to experience that.
Mm. It brings to mind the quote from one of my favorite movies. From the quote, you might know what the movie is. Uh, you gotta get your mind right, Luke. From Cool Hand Luke, where the warden is basically disciplining. And by the way, the premise of that movie I find so fascinating and ridiculous. The whole movie is based upon the fact that he gets drunk and he cuts the heads off of parking meters and then spends the rest of the movie in a chain gang. I remember pondering that one day and going, okay, he didn't kill anybody and he wasn't a terrorist and he didn't do this, that, but there he is. And he and George Kennedy and a bunch of other guys spent some time, laying down tar on roads and digging ditches and all of that stuff because he was cutting the heads off of parking meters. Amazing. Um,
I remember the hard-boiled egg eating
yes,
from that movie.
that's my boy, Luke. Eat them eggs, Luke. Come on, Luke. Eat them eggs, Luke. Oh man, I tell you, saw that for the first time in Southwest literature class in high school. and it became one of my favorite movies here. Um, we're talking with Dr. Brad Stuart. We're talking about facing death, spirituality, science, and surrender at the end. And this is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're talking with the author of Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life. And this was published about a year and a half ago as of our conversation. Dr. Brad Stewart, the author thereof. Um, do you see science and spirituality seemingly coming closer and closer together on this subject, where for thousands and thousands of years in the ancient wisdom teachings, it has talked to us about death and dying and what that's all about, and the fact that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that science is beginning to sort of recognize that, yeah, we're not quite there yet, but I can sort of see some light at the end of that tunnel.
Yes. The short answer to your question is yes, but the question's complicated because science. I mean, first, we have to realize that science has only existed for about 400 years. And when you look at how long human beings have existed, especially in a civilized state where we started farming and forming cities. I mean, that was 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, maybe longer. 400 years is an eye blink in the history of intelligent humans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the thing that science is based on is before science, we all we had to go on was our own experience. And so, we didn't step outside ourselves and measure things. The big breakthrough in science with Galileo and people with telescopes looking at the moon and stars, that was that we could measure reality and begin to calculate probabilities, and as soon as we began to measure things and got out of immediately experiencing them and reporting that, we separated ourselves from reality, and science is in that place. In fact, uh, I didn't have space in the book, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk about what quantum mechanics is teaching us.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of writing, I got to say, about quantum mechanics that absolutely is pretty woo-woo. You really have to know math to know what quantum mechanics is really about. But from a non-mathematics perspective, I think what quantum mechanics is teaching us is that we are not separate from the things that we observe. So the thing that's so difficult for science to reconcile with quantum mechanics is science just assumes that there's a reality right here in front of us that's there whether we're seeing it or not. When the tree falls in the forest and nobody's around, of course it makes noise. Quantum mechanics tells us that you've got to be there participating in seeing and using instruments to measure, the particles that we study and the things that we take apart and look at in pieces. You actually need to be participating in order to see what's there. If you're not seeing and participating in it, it's not really real or happening. And it's a very tough concept to grasp. And it's very tough for science to think that, maybe there is no reality unless we're there manufacturing it
Mm-hmm.
moment by moment as we see it. So is science and spirituality coming together? I think going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, yes, science and spirituality are coming together, but not because science wants to, or not because science yet really gets what, a consciousness surviving death is about, or even wants to accept that that's real. I think science is starting to get to a place where it's going to be compelled to examine its basic assumptions on the basis of the data that we're getting from people who return from death, and also psychedelic therapy, the data we're getting
Hmm.
from from psychedelic studies, which say a lot of the same things that you get from near-death data. It's just psychedelics, especially brain imaging studies. I talk about this in the book too. On psilocybin or LSD, if you examine the brain activity of somebody who's on a sufficient dose of LSD or psilocybin, it's turning off certain centers in your brain that are critical for thinking and your concept of yourself. If you don't turn those centers off, you don't have the mystical experience that heals people's fear of death
Hmm.
in psilocybin therapy. Psilocybin is really effective in healing the fear of death in, say, cancer patients who are terror-stricken about dying. Psilocybin is very effective 75% of the time in
Hmm.
relieving that fear. And it's because it turns off a part of your brain that's critical for knowing who you are, believing that you are yourself in a body. That gets turned off and things get reorganized in there, and you get to see beyond who you think you are. And that's the mystical part of the psychedelic experience that's very comparable to the mystical aspects of what people see when they die and come back. It may not be mystical at all. It may be a reality that's more fundamental than the reality we see through our eyes and our senses when we're connected here on Earth. That may be a very limited view of
Yeah.
what is actually real. What you see on psilocybin is funny. Could give you a glimpse of a bigger reality that's more fundamental and real than the limited picture that we get when
Hmm.
we're in our regular bodies going about our day-to-day activity.
Right. Dr. Brad Stewart, my guest, facing death, spirituality, science, and surrender at the end of life here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan with Dr. Stewart, and to the point of the hallucinogens and what have you, psychedelics. One of the things that intrigued me, I have a CD or a DVD of the movie having to do with ayahuasca. And one of my favorite parts of it was a young man, middle-aged, I guess, and he was talking about his experience, and he was going on and on and on and on and on. And he says, and I came back, and they helped to wake me and so forth, and I started to tell them where I was, and then this and that and the other thing, and that I'd been, it was like over a course of years and years and years that this thing. How long was I gone? 10 minutes. And what that goes to show is that, yeah, time is definitely a man-made construct. There's no question about it. So it's to me that's fascinating. And the other part too is there's a lot about Chinese manufacturing I don't like. Not because it comes from China, but because the inferior products. When I buy stuff that comes from overseas like that, and it falls apart within a week, that's what bothers me. However, Chinese medicine, on the other hand, that's been around for over 5,000 years, with no AMA and FDA, I might add, they just knew that it worked. They just knew. Do you feel that with the coming together of spirituality and science, and I'll change the word science to medicine, that we are beginning to slowly understand the powers of the human mind and body and soul and spirit, um, that the doctor actually might help facilitate the healing, but doesn't really do the healing. It's the individual that makes the choice to heal. Because I'm sure you ran into this, maybe in hospice, if not in your own practice, that some people that would have a similar condition, some people would go on and live another 100, another 40, 50, 60 years, and other people would die from the same darn thing because they just kind of gave up.
Yeah, I actually, my wife and I have been to China on a trip that we took to see hospitals over there where modern technological medicine was practiced right alongside China, traditional old Chinese medicine in the same place. They brought them together, and we were in Beijing and went to a number of hospitals there. Then we went to Shanghai, and I think they are able to combine both. And
Hmm.
what's interesting about, I mean, you can just confine yourself to the body. You don't have to go outside it to, reality beyond death or any of that. Just let's stay within the body for a second.
Hmm.
I think there's things about the way energy flows in the body that Chinese medicine, I think, just learned by experience over hundreds or thousands of years, and they still use. As we speak, right now, today, my wife is at an acupuncturist because she has she has I shouldn't talk about this in public, but she wouldn't mind. She has a terrible arthritis condition at the base of each of her thumbs. It's very unusual, but the
Hmm.
joints have just gone. She's got terrible pain in those joints. We've been to hand specialists and all kinds of therapists. There is nothing that traditional medicine has to offer her besides surgery, and the surgery doesn't even really. It's something that I don't think, as a physician, that she should be going through except as a last resort.
Hmm.
Now, acupuncture helps her. It helps take her pain away. She's going to wind up going to a series of treatments just after the first treatment, the pain was gone for 3, 4 days after her first treatment, and she
Oh.
hadn't been pain free forever. Now, this Chinese practitioner, he's Chinese American. He's the son of a doctor who came over here from China, trained in acupuncture over there. When I was in practice in my office in the 1980s, this gentleman was practicing acupuncture right down the street, and I would send patients to him because he could help with things that I had no answer for. In fact, my mother, she's no longer with us, but she had terrible arthritis, rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. I sent her to this gentleman's father and had her get acupuncture. Really helped her too. And you know, that's just an example of how I think American medicine and Chinese medicine could work together. And I think now that we have integrative medicine, it's a specialty now. Integrative medicine doctors do bring in things like acupuncture and lots of other modalities that we used to sort of poo-poo and now we accept because we in Western medicine are take it apart and analyze it approach really effective for developing new drugs and things like that. Really not effective for problems like pain, where we just don't have answers anywhere near as good as, say, acupuncture or lots of other different modalities that I think science is beginning to accept.
Yeah. It's amazing. It truly is. I saw a 60 Minutes piece not long ago. The subject matter was basically placebos. Now, normally what you do is you have your control group and your test group. And your test group, you're given the placebo, but you don't tell them that that's what you're doing. But in this piece, they told the people they were giving them a placebo. And the number of, shall we say, positive reactions to the placebo was equal to, if not greater, than studies that had been done where the test group was not told that they had been given a placebo. And so it's like the power of the placebo. What if they just gave you a capsule just filled with gel or something, not even like a sugar pill or something? It seems to me like the body has so much power, but this leads to another subject I want to talk about that ties into the subject of death and dying and facing death. My father, who has, of course, as I said earlier, passed on about a year and a half ago. His brother was suffering from cancer. My wife and I had just gone through the levels to become Reiki masters. And in that training, we were told that we do not control the energy in the sense that we're sending it to a person or a situation for a specific purpose. The only purpose in sending the energy that we do through Reiki is to allow the individual or situation to do with it what they will. They can do nothing with it or they can do something with it, and then they can do something, whatever that is that they want. It's all up to them. So we sent this healing energy to my uncle. And following his funeral, my mother shared with us what happened after we sent him this absentee healing. They gave us a photograph so we were able to focus. She said that he got really angry one morning and he took his medications and threw them across the room against the wall. Then he got into his wheelchair and he wheeled across the compound where the family lived on this ranch to the house where his son lived. And he went inside and they had a time of, I guess, closure and what have you. And then he passed away. And obviously, the term healing energy is used. And so I pose the question to you in terms of healing. Do we need to come up with another term? Because from the outward perspective, that energy didn't heal him, at least not on the physical level, because his body ceased to function and he died. So do we need to maybe come up with another term or a different definition of healing? Because my father was diagnosed with early onset dementia and Parkinson's 5 days before he passed. That was, I guess, the choice he made, is that that's how he wanted to go, but he wasn't going to stay here with those conditions. And I don't blame him. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote my book was that I discovered this in my third year of medical school. And I won't tell the story here because it's chapter one of the book.
Get a
I
copy,
discovered,
folks.
I discovered that there is a tremendous difference between healing and curing. I don't believe that we should stop using the word healing. I do think, going back to some of your other questions about do we overtreat people? Do we try to cure people past the point where this attempt to cure them causes them more struggle, more pain, more suffering than just keeping them comfortable like we do in hospice? I think the answer is yes. But, curing, I mean, you're talking about what happened to your uncle. You didn't cure him. You
Nope.
didn't.
Mm-mm.
You didn't cure him. And what I discovered, and I've been doing this for 50 years now, what I think is pretty clear, to me anyway, is there is a point in every person's life when curing is no longer something that you should be chasing. You can continue, like you say, it's your choice. You can continue to go after a cure, but healing is something that you always have access to. And like you also just said, the healer doesn't have any control over the effect that their healing may or may not have on the person that they're working with.
Mm.
That's completely up to that person's own system, and it may not even be up to their own will. I mean, you can't will yourself to get better. I think you can will yourself to heal through things like meditation. I think psychedelics used properly
Mm-hmm.
can be tremendously healing, but healing has a whole different definition. Curing, pretty obvious. I mean, if your body operates better, I've had two hip replacements on the same side because the first one went bad and, it was a nightmare experience. But the second one, lucky for me, worked really well. I was cured of terrible pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cure.
Mm-hmm.
The, the healing experience, I think, and the way I define it in the book, is if you are able to move closer and closer to who you really are, which, and I don't want to be disrespectful to anybody listening to this, but if you think you know who you are and you think you know yourself, you do not know who you really are, because who you really are is way down underneath, deeper than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have developed a strong self to get by in the world, what I would call the self. I mean, or the ego. The ego has so much baggage. You are not yourself. You are much more elemental and essential than that. The you that's really you, I believe, and I know it myself, can be reached in meditation. It can be reached through psychedelics. It can be reached through prayer. I think that's exactly what the healing that Jesus did in the New Testament, I think, was related really strongly to the fact that he really knew his own essence, where he really knew who he was and where he came from.
Mm.
We all, and include myself in this because it really takes constant work to stay in touch with who you really are. We all have to work hard, to stay in that place.
Yeah.
People who can heal, people who have become healers, I think, at least the people who in their presence, I'm not talking about manipulating needles now in acupuncture. I'm talking about the kind of healing that flows between people when one person is suffering and another person has the healing role. And you don't have to be a doctor. You can be a hairdresser or a bartender, okay? You just need to be listening and you need to be wanting uh, a better way of being for that person, more well-being. And when you do that, you get closer to your own essence and you help that other person get closer to their essence. That's healing. And you can, once you learn sort of how to go about it, it's a wonderful experience because the healer gets healed too, because you
Mm.
can't help but get closer to your own essence when you're in the middle of that process. So
Yeah.
that's not curing. And
Right.
with your uncle, when he got angry and threw his pills across the room, you don't know what he was thinking or feeling when he did that.
Right.
That could have been part of his experience of getting ready to leave. And we just
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I mean, it's a mystery. He was still in his body. He was still having emotional reactions to things. He hadn't yet gone through the portal to that other place where it's very different. So anything that happens on this side, I don't think we can know unless that person can sit down and relate to you what they're actually going through at the time and really be truthful and conscious about it. And it's rare when that happens.
It was described to me after my description of my uncle's experience as it was relayed to me that uh, there was a level of healing through maybe the throwing of the medications, and he just needed to get that anger out. And then maybe there was some healing going on between he and his son, knowing that he was going to be departing soon. He wanted to make sure that, like I'm able to say about my father, there was nothing left unsaid at the time of his passing between he and I. Whereas I know a lot of people, their parents pass on. Oh, I wish I had said this. I wish I had told them that, and so on and so forth. And of course, I let them know. I said, well, yeah, but see, you still can because they're not gone. I mean, maybe in the physical they're gone. And I still talk to my dad, and I still talk to my sister, and my best friend of 53 years who passed on May of last year. I still have those conversations. And as far as my father's concerned, I don't hear his voice, but I get these impressions every so often. This awareness of his loving me and being proud of the work that I do and so forth, which he actually did tell me verbally when he was alive. So, I mean, there's certainly, I would agree, we don't want to necessarily change the word, but I think that we need to change our observation, if you will, as with my uncle. Okay, we didn't cure him of his cancer, but maybe the energy gave him the opportunity to heal relationships and, heal a particular part within himself and so forth. It's a fascinating series of questions and conversations to be had. We're talking with Brad Stuart here on Tell Me Your Story. We're talking about his book, which I really would encourage you to get a copy of, and it's not that hard to get. All you have to do is go to bradstewartmd.com. That's bradstewartmd.com. We'll be linked to that website at both the podcast and videocast sites so that you can get a copy of Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life. Here on Tell Me Your Story. Brad Stuart is a doctor who is my guest and is an author as well of Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life. I shared earlier that my family that was around him sung him, as they phrase it, into heaven. And that makes me think about this one experience, multiple experiences that I've had, primarily in the 80s and 90s when I went through these personal growth programs. And they have this amazing experience that you can have if you will but trust. And it's not one of those necessarily a trust fall, okay? It's actually what's called a carry. And what they do is they have you stand up and the people are behind you and you lean back and then they raise you up over their heads and they carry you around the room. And I was just blown away by that experience, not only as the carried, but also as the carrier, being a part of the group that are holding this person, lifting this person up, letting this person know how important and special they are. To me, it seems as though this aspect of surrendering at the end of life, just saying, you know what, I'm ready. And I don't know about you. I'm 64, and I've said this probably for the last 10 years or 15 years on this program, that if today's my day, I'm good to go. Okay. Is there more I want to do? You bet. First of all, I need to outlive my great grandmother who lived to be 100. So I got a little ways to go. And there's a lot I want to do, but I don't have any control over the departure date. Okay. The plane landed. I know when that happened. I don't know when the plane is going to leave and take me with it, but I'm ready to go. Have you found in your experience, especially through hospice, that the majority of people, they're not, they're not ready to go?
I think very few people are actually ready to go. My experience with folks is that um, it's relatively simple to be intellectually prepared to go. And I'll just use myself as an example. I got a whole chapter in my book about my own experience when I was diagnosed with cancer. I had already worked with people who were dying for quite a while. And I'd worked in the emergency room and the ICU, and I had been through a lot with people, and I kind of naively and egotistically, I thought, I've kind of got this death thing wired. I sort of know what it's about. I'm kind of there with this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got diagnosed with cancer. And, it was the kind of cancer, I'm not going to go into gory details, but it was the kind of cancer where if you don't get it out of there, it will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily they were able to get it out. And, I've done well since. But I could not believe the difference between how certain, I don't know, how confident I felt about handling death. The difference between that And the horror and terror I felt when I was diagnosed with cancer in my own body. I mean, I've always been healthy, with
Mm-hmm.
the exception of things like hips and all that. And I've always bounced back from everything. It really got to me to the point where I had to take a week or two off of work. I couldn't even function. It really got to me that my body that I was so comfortable in, I thought, had created something inside me that would kill me. My body betrayed me, and I couldn't get over that. It woke me up at night. I was horrified. And I go through how I dealt with it. I mean, I did it in my own way and kind of hit rock bottom. And I went through I describe in the book my own process of hitting bottom in a sort of an imagery way. But here's the thing, Richard. I mean, I still don't know, and I can't know if that was really rock bottom for me, and I won't know until I get my real diagnosis.
Mm.
I mean, I'm 75, and I think for my age, I'm in very, very good health, but I can't predict what's going to happen. And, I can't predict if I'll get another cancer diagnosis, even though cancer, because of advances in oncology, I mean, have turned cancer in many cases into a kind of a chronic illness. It doesn't kill you right away,
Yeah.
except there are certain kinds of it that still do. And if I
Mm.
got one of those, I can't tell you how I would react. I think I would do better than I did last time, but I'm talking from here,
Mm-hmm.
where the experience of how it hits you comes from is from down in here,
Yeah. Yeah.
down deep inside. And I think it's very difficult to know what that response is going to be until you're actually there and it's happening to your own body. So I gotta tell you the answer to your question is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's different for every person. Some
Yep.
people handle it really well. Other people go kicking and screaming literally till the moment before they die. And I've seen both and everything in between. And it's real hard to predict. Some of the some of the people who kick and scream the worst are in life some of the most spiritual folks you could ever imagine. Others, a friend of mine died recently, and I was there when he did, and he was a very spiritual person, many trips to India, and he was able to let go so easily. I really admired how he did, but that's
Mm.
not everybody, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
just don't know.
I've heard a lot of those stories too, on both sides. And there's a wonderful learning for us as we experience them, whether we're there in person or not. I mean, there is a part of me that does wish that I could have been there with my father when he passed away. But the one thing that I really had hoped, and I'm sure he knows it now, but the one thing that I had really hoped that I could have shared with him and gotten through to him when he was alive, because he would express that he really didn't feel like he had that much of an influence on our lives, the six of us, the six kids. And my father was not a wayward soul. He at 9 to 5, he didn't drive, so my mother would take him to work and she'd pick him up and bring him home, and we'd have dinner and all. I mean, he was a very present person in our lives. To that extent, at his memorial, unchoreographed, I might add, the theme brought out by each person's expression and statements about my father, the theme of his memorial could have been, "Dad, we would not be who we are if it had not been for you in our lives." And then in another interview, when I was sharing this, I got a different perspective and I understood better why he looked at it that way. And it was because the mother, the woman of the family, the one who gave birth to the children, actually, I suppose, if you want to put it into percentages, actually does have more of an impact on the lives of the children. more so than the father. And that's not taking anything away from the father. That's just the real, that's the math, if you will, of the whole thing. That's the dynamic. And it's okay. So that gave me a different perspective on how my father felt about that and how he used to express it. But I will say the one thing that really chuckled, I got a chuckle out of this following his passing. My mother told me about a conversation she had with him following the passing of his eldest daughter, my oldest sister, a year prior to his passing. And he shared with me when I was there for her memorial. He says, parents aren't supposed to be burying their kids. And I didn't have a response for that. I mean, what do you say to that? Nothing. You just let him speak that. But he said to my mother one afternoon, he said, I'm tired. I'm just tired of being here. I just don't want to be here anymore. And I understood that. My father was not suicidal, that kind of thing. He was just tired. I mean, he died at 91. And my mother, knowing of his health, you say you're 75 and basically you're pretty darn healthy guy. My mother says he had a high blood pressure. He had a blood pressure of a 20-year-old. So her response to he says, I don't want to be here anymore. Her response was, okay, so what are you going to die of? You know, because he was so healthy. And sometimes I wonder if maybe we do ourselves more harm than good by trying to eat and drink and stay healthy and everything, because there comes a point in our lives, and I had this experience too with another one of my guests who was not in hospice, but was there for a friend of hers who was in her 90s. And I think it would be referred to as assisted suicide because the woman says, I've done everything I want to do. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't need to be here anymore. But see, she wasn't suicidal either. She was done. It's kind of like when you're done with the car that you're driving, right? It's gone 300,000 miles and I think it's time to get a new one or at least get rid of this because it's not functioning real well. And we'll do that, but we won't let people make their own decisions and make their own choices. Do you think that that is also something that is gradually changing in terms of people having the right of self-determination? Again, I'm not talking here about this concept of being depressed and suicidal either.
No, there's no question that's changing. I can remember when here in California, the first legislative initiative came up considering could we legalize assisted suicide? This was years and years and years ago. I was very against it at the time. And then I changed my mind later on. I had a, here's a story that reflects on what you were saying about your dad and some of the other people you're talking about too. I had a very good friend who was a surgeon, really good surgeon. I used to go and assist him in surgery and I would watch him. He was technically incredible and a great human being at the same time. He was also a real athlete. He was a biker. He would take 40-mile bike trips. He got, he came down with Parkinson's disease and
Mm.
it progressed pretty rapidly and he had to quit his job. He became so disabled that he wound up in a wheelchair at home, almost unable to speak. He couldn't move more than his eyelids. And he became so depressed. His wife was taking care of him. He felt guilty about being a burden, blah, blah, blah. I went to see him a number of times and I said, look, um, something that has helped, and he told me, I really would like to end my life. I'm no good to anyone and I just want it to be over. And I said, okay, here's something that people have found to be helpful. You're going to have to go get evaluated by your doctor and see if you qualify for assisted suicide. And if you do, they'll write you a prescription for the medication. You put it in your medicine cabinet, and just knowing it's there may help you feel better. So he
Hmm.
did that, got the meds in his medicine cabinet, and felt a little bit better, but still, he was teetering on should I take these or not? And he was getting to the point where he couldn't take them on his own because he was paralyzed. And the law says you must take them yourself. You can't have somebody else give them to you.
Right.
So the turning point for him came when his son showed up one day and he said, Dad, I got a slideshow I want to show you. I made this. And instead of slides, he had a big easel, and the slides were printed on big poster paper. And his wife sent me a picture. She texted me like the next day. He said, "This is the title slide from the slideshow that he showed his dad." And the title slide was How This Guy's Name Changed 5 Generations of Life in Our Family. And the whole slideshow was about what effect this guy had had on all of his family, not just his kids, his grandkids, that he had great grandkids by that time.
Hmm.
All kinds of people. And when he saw the slideshow, it changed his mind. It was a little bit like what you're talking about, people singing a person uh, to heaven,
Hmm.
except it was before he died.
Yeah.
And it was very healing for him. And he wound up not taking the medication, and he felt a whole lot better after that. Why? Because like when people pick you up and carry you, there's a connection between people that's heart to heart that can lead to healing. That
Yeah.
what his son did for him was really healing. And again, you can't know what's going to be healing, and even if healing actually happened, back to your uncle when he threw the medication across the room, anger is one of the stages you go through in grief. And you can go through all those stages really fast in a matter of minutes when you're close to death. And we have no way of knowing whether he wasn't going through his own letting go and anger and grieving right before he left, because you can't know what was in his mind.
Right.
And especially, you can't know what happened after he got out of his body and was no longer in that mindset.
Mm.
That's what's different.
Yeah.
People will look back and see how everything they thought and felt in their life was just confined to that one brain.
Yeah.
And healing is moving beyond that,
Yeah.
which I think you can do while you're still here if you do the right kind of work.
Dr. Brad Stewart, my guest, Facing Death, the title of the book. This is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan with Dr. Brad Stewart. And Dr. Stewart, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the work we're doing here to try to enlighten people, hopefully give them a sense of peace, if you will, to recognize that this is not the end. It's in a manner of speaking, it's just a continuation. I was almost going to say this is just the beginning. No, it's a continuation of sorts. But nonetheless, I think that through our conversation here, I think there are people that I hope do feel a little bit better about the people that they've lost. I'm amazed sometimes that when I go back and I take a look at the number of people just in the last 10 years that have passed on that I have known, that I've had relationships with. And I got to tell you, I'm just glad they were in my life because of the things that they shared with me and that I hope that I can pass on to others, and can feel as though, yeah, I've given everything I've had to give. There's a wonderful quote that I have in my book that says something along the lines of, that this life is not, the end of the life is not to be ended with a body that's perfect and in great shape and all of that stuff. It really should be where you are sliding into the end with a glass of champagne in one hand and a fistful of chocolate covered strawberries in the other, saying, wow, what a ride. And I'm hoping that we have inspired people in that regard. But I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's really been a pleasure.
I have three final questions I ask all of my guests that I would like to ask you before we wrap things up. But I'd like to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all 9 of those times at richarddugan.com with podcasts at SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio. We're also on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and click notification. Also want to let you know that Choices, 5 Steps for Life is available at Amazon.com. I hope you'll get a copy. Also, if you'd like to support the work that we are doing financially, we have a PayPal account, which is there for your security as well as ours. And we have links to both of those websites, Amazon and PayPal, on the homepage at the top of richarddugan.com. We also ask that you take some time during this, the decade of perfect vision, which, folks, we are almost halfway through, spending time going within to that quiet, peaceful, calm space and listening to that still small voice. The first of the 3 questions that I ask all of my guests is, and in your case, it's, who is Brad Stuart?
I am. I am that I am. I don't want to quote the burning bush, but I think that's all I can really say.
What gets you up in the morning?
Uh, what gets me up is the awareness that it's light outside and it's time to move through whatever life brings me that day, and it's fine with me if I don't know what it's going to be.
Hmm. And finally, what was your best day?
My best day was when I met my wife.
Hmm.
It was 25 or 30 years ago now, but my wife knows things that I don't. So we go together very well. That doesn't mean we always agree, but it's a great combination.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Brad Stuart, author of Facing Death, I thank you once again for joining us. And once again, I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I will see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.